Hi everyone, welcome to Hot House Mindspace 15. Here with us today is Martin Constable. He's an artist and was formerly head of the Digital Media Arts program in RMIT, Vietnam. This is actually the first of two dialogues that we'll be having with Martin. This first one is titled How Artists Destroy Themselves. And the next one we'll review in the coming days. Many students, including myself, as well as Yanyun, have been taught by Martin, and beyond, many of Southeast Asia's most renowned artists are actually taught by Martin, a lot of them. Joining with me actually is also Yanyun, as I was saying, visual artist, researcher and lecturer. Currently, Yanyun is a professor of the practice of Tufts University in Boston, USA. And yeah, so welcome everyone to our conversation.
Well, what I'd like to do, if that's, and I think what we discussed is to address things in my practice that are of general application and interest. Because I think, but biography on its own is actually mildly irritating. There's always a high degree of fakery there, and whereas I'm quite interested in some of the things that I've encountered that I think are of general application. So, and I should perhaps explain, for those of you who aren't familiar with recent events in my life, why I'm looking like a pirate. As I had an accident in my workshop, and I am now monocular. I've only got one eye. But the good news is that an eye patch suits me. So, and if possible, I'd like to talk. Okay, so Martin Constable, British artist. You know, so many times. I would say about once a week, I'm asked, "Where are you from?" And I'll sometimes say Britain because I was raised in the British educational system. My passport is Canadian, and but my heart is many different places. So, but I came from the UK to first to Singapore, now to Vietnam. And what I'd like to first address, again in general terms. And this refers to the title of the talk, is How Artists Destroy Themselves. And 20 years ago now, 23 years ago, as anecdote time, I was doing okay. I had a sweet little job, a nice gig. I was teaching at Goldsmiths and St. Martin's. I had a house in London Bridge. And everything was sorted. I had a wonderful studio. And then a whole bunch of things happened at the same time. And germane to this talk is that a couple of people I knew, artists, both of them artists, killed themselves in their studios. Okay. So now I'm not going to claim any great grief at their loss. These were people I knew, at least one of them I was very fond of, but that wasn't the thing. What was the thing was that I was quite close to not only them, but also their studios. And I was in at least one of their studios almost immediately after. And the impact that it had on, I guess, my, how can I put this? Shortly after that, I would say that I lost faith in studios. Before then, studios had been places that were enjoyable to be in for me, that were always part of large and diverse and integrated communities. Well, sometimes integrated, sometimes not. And that a studio was a special place and a good place. And following that, although it took me quite a while to process this knowledge, a studio became a sick place and a place. It's like the feeling was like tidying up the morning after a party. And the wisdom that I picked up is that anything an artist can suffer anything. They can not have enough money for their art, not have enough time for their art. But the only bad thing that can truly happen to an artist is to wake up one morning and not have the faith for their art. And that is what happened to me, although it took me a horribly long time to fully realize and process this. And at the time, I was managing a studio and managing what we call the open studios. And so I was passing, I was in space some few short weeks after those suicides. I as part of this open studio, I visited, must have been about 30 or 40 studios. And going from one to the other was a really odd experience. At that time, there was a huge diversity in the London art school system. And you could tell, just opening the door, you could almost always tell exactly what art school they'd been to, just glancing at what was there. And some of them had very tidy studios and some of them had chaotic studios. And and seeing so many one after the other, it sort of emphasized this lack of faith. It was like you see one thing and it's meaningful, but if you see 30 or 40 things, similar things of the same class, it becomes less meaningful. And there was only one studio where I felt a connection. That was a crazy middle-aged guy. He had not been to art school at all. He just loved art, and he had the smallest studio, and his studio was absolutely full of effectively naive pastiches of the Cubists and the Impressionists and people like that. And he was clearly so in love with painting. But I contrast that to at least one of these suicides when I went into his studio, and it was a small well, it was a large studio, but as painters do, they stack their paintings up one after the other in descending size so they don't damage each other. And there were so many paintings in this room. There was just about a narrow corridor walking through this studio. And on either side, there were this sort of valley of paintings. And none of them had sold. And to be frank, none of them were very good. So that, although I can emphasize again, it took me a long time to process. I could not paint. I could not fully function, and so that was that phase, if you like, and perhaps simultaneous to that, I was also getting sick of London, perhaps through this association with those events, and I was offered, actually found a job in Singapore. And I think between deciding that I'd had enough and I wanted to move to Asia and actually getting this job, it's something like 2 or 3 weeks. It was ridiculously fast. And I'd always been interested in Asia, but one thing that attracted me to it was its position to the past. People say, oh, Asian culture is so traditional. I think one of the things that I really like, okay, I'll give you an example that sometime before I was dating a Japanese girl and she had some Japanese coins. And I said, oh, those are nice coins. And she said, you can choose one. And so I chose the oldest. And she says, that is such an English thing to do. A Japanese person would have chosen the newest. And this always wanting to discharge the past and go towards the future was what I perceived as a feature of Asia. I'd never been to Asia at that time, but I was looking at it distantly. Certainly, I think in London and in Europe, they have a neurotic position to the past, and perhaps, in Singapore and in some parts of Asia, they have a different attitude towards the past because a lot of their past didn't exactly belong to them, if you see what I mean. So, I was attracted to this perhaps romantic notion that that I could find the new and find the future. And I remember looking at Singapore. I was certainly familiar with Singaporean artists. Many of my students have been to Singapore, so I wasn't entirely naive. I remember looking at Singapore on Google Maps at the time, and or its equivalent, and seeing HDB after HDB after HDB. I'm thinking, this is fucking beautiful, because there I was in the middle of London Bridge and trying to, almost crusty with the past. So that was that. And coming out of that, I think the general lesson is faith. And how an artist does require faith in order to operate. And if we want to define faith, we could say, well, as the belief that something exists when it doesn't really exist, or the belief in something that's yet to exist. So it's similar to a vision. You're looking ahead and you're seeing something that doesn't yet exist in the world, and you want to bring it into the world. And you have the faith is bringing it into the world. And when that goes, you are, with all due respect, fucked as an artist. Yeah. So I don't want this to be a monologue. Do you have any questions, ripostes?
I have one. I'm thinking about it as, framing that you're looking for the future. So my curious question, now that you've moved to Vietnam, did you find it, or did you find the story?
I found something sideways. I mean, what I described was my understanding of Asia at the time, and why I seem to remember that you went to the UK at one point, didn't you, when you were in the middle of school? And
yeah, that was the first place Sarah and I went for a backpacking trip. Yeah,
and
that was the
you had an idea of it, and then the idea was and then the reality was a different thing. It's like the first time everyone knows what a desert is, but who's been to one? The first time I went to a desert was, in some ways I thought, well, I've seen these before, but then there are unexpected realities that creep in. Sorry. So did I find it? Yeah, like I say, I found something. I found something sideways to that. But I do maintain that, every culture, by being a culture, is shackled to something, and the nature of shackles the Europeans' shackles are different to those of someone who lives in Asia. And it's a neurotic thing, you know, the things that link us to where we've come from fundamentally. So yeah, but simultaneous to that, and that's I guess the next thing I want to talk about. Now, one thing I haven't shown is the paintings that I did at that time. I had a kind of a shopping list of celeb clients, and I tell you what they were like. Arcadia. So what it was, I absolutely loved art history, but I loved art history as a thief might love it. So I was ripping off everyone, you know, everyone and everything, and these were very pleasant pieces, very celebratory, yeah, and they sold very well. I did very well out of them. And another thing that happened to me around about that time was goldsmiths, taking my MA in goldsmiths, and that was like a slow burning bomb in my brain. It's a good education takes you apart and then leaves you to reassemble yourself, and it didn't help that I was the kind of work I was doing it was difficult to locate in the work that was popular at the time. But that's another thread of the story. I think it's a minor thread. But I'll tell you one thing that, okay, here's another thing I learned, is that certainly coming out of Goldsmiths, to frame something in a personal manner was just not done. You just, what I've told you about this biography was like an anathema. It's irrelevance. And yet I see its value now, and certainly I see its value when I look at the work of students. So, and the interesting thing is that when you function as an artist, that stuff comes out. And you can't exactly filter and control it, and there are some things that come out that to put it another way, sometimes producing art is a little bit like being on a psychiatrist's couch, because there are unexpected truths that come out. So here's an example. One of the people that died, that I lost, their name was Monkey, and recently I've started painting again. We'll come to that in a bit. And I started painting monkeys, and it took me about a freaking year, to make the connection. And I'm thinking, how stupid can an artist be? How ignorant can they be of what makes themselves? And yet, of course, it's true. The stuff that makes us will find its way into our work. Of course, that's the dumbest observation in the world. But to be in some kind of command of that is important. So it's going to happen, but best that it happens knowingly. But this was a relatively new wisdom that a work can be looked at in terms of life events. Not that I want to be one of these, how can I put it? Well, I'm not Tracy Emin, put it that way. Okay, so yeah, I don't believe that consciously going to your past is anything anything to be proud of. Yeah.
To a degree, I think you were somewhat hinting that also when you leave the UK, it's kind of also living your life as an artist.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Right.
Not only did I give up at that time, I gave up painting and I gave up my studio, and I never felt cleaner. And that was the other thing. I felt clean. And at the time, I was also getting more interested in the digital. And I seriously wanted, at the time, I seriously thought about becoming a graphic artist. And I actually sent my portfolio. I wanted to abandon art altogether. I sent my portfolio off to a few people and I got, I had no idea how to do it, and I did it wrong, and thank God. And so I was, and the other important thing is that, well, I went to ADM in NTU, and I knew this was a design school, not a fine art school. And that was important to me because I just wanted to leave fine art alone, because I'd been teaching in Goldsmiths and in St. Martin's, my two places, but also in Bristol, UWE, and a few other places, the Royal College. And I've been teaching there. And when I had begun teaching fine art, it was a fantastic experience, and I loved it. But around about that time, it was like my voice was becoming further and further separated from my experience. So I was sitting there and I was looking at myself, and I'm thinking, Martin, you're saying the same old things that you've said 100 times. And I became very disassociated from that. Again, it was the loss of faith extended even to the teaching of fine art, and I just became bored with it. But I must say that my last year at Goldsmiths, I think, was the best, and one of the ones I've enjoyed the most, and one of the ones of which I'm most proud. So anyway, so I left London and left fine art, and I certainly left painting, and I moved to the digital, and that's the next thing, and that the appeal of the digital. So, and it does have an appeal, and it took me a while to crack it.
How? Like, where did it pop up? Exactly.
Well, it's just something, the digital sort of came bit by bit into my life. My father bought me a Mac, and a Mac clone, and I started playing with it, and but it's one of those really perverse tools. You can't. It's not a medium at all. It's not. Anyone who even uses the word digital medium is deluded. It's the impersonation of one. It can pretend to be this. It can pretend to be that. So it was always, for me, it was, I could produce images with it, but for me, everything felt slightly veneer thin. I've always tried to maintain the belief that I was making objects when I did the digital, a print, the screen-based thing. But it's only recently that I feel I've kind of cracked that one. I love the idea of sitting in a clean desk and solving problems, and enjoying the cues and the hints that come from the digital. So so I'd find software, and I thought, well, this looks cool. and I'd play with it. And from that would come an idea, which is entirely the opposite to how it's often framed. You know, people were saying, well, one of the things I introduced in the digital media program, I insisted that everyone we interviewed express a software philosophy. Well, it's a digital media program. They must have one, whether they know it or not. And most of them said, well, I think it's a tool. And I think, no, it's not. It's a play space. Well, okay, it is what it is, and maybe it's a tool for them. But for me, it can feed you. You can get an idea from the software just as much you can express an idea with software. So it's a two-way street. One of the problems with software and me was that I love problem solving, and as every problem solver will tell you, sometimes you can love problems more than making art. So you think, well, how can I do this? How can I solve that problem? And you spend, let's say, a week solving that problem. And you think, well, what have I actually made? What have I made at the end of this week? Nothing. But you've really enjoyed solving the problem. So that for me was one trap of software.
I think it's good to give a little bit of maybe an example. Like I remembered when you were teaching digital painting, and you really couldn't stand how gradients look on Adobe software. Like it's always choppy, and you don't get this even thing. And I remembered you were really trying to figure out a way to solve this problem.
Yeah. that was probably me thinking aloud. I mean, one of the things I like doing when I teach software is to find something core and common. So the gradient is choppy. So why? Well, it's because Photoshop employs 8-bit space. So you've only got 255 degrees of difference to manage. And 255 degrees of difference. Now, one of the things that I went into when I started looking at that was perception and the limits of perception. So I'm asking myself, well, how many degrees of difference can the human eye perceive? Well, that's such a complex question, because the perception is so different to a screen. Perception is very contingent upon what's being looked at the time. And no one has actually managed to answer that question fully. So, I've gone off on a tangent, haven't I?
No, I mean,
point as well, like, you know, you've always insisted on non-destructive workflows in digital, which we can't do in oil painting because the mediums would mix.
Sure, yes.
So I think that how you've introduced the separation of the different
yes.
Well,
I'm now adopting a more nuanced philosophy. So I think it's that. So you can look at these different animals in the digital. So there is the composite, and then there is the so-called digital painting. Now, one thing I can accept is that a digital painting, if you're going to enjoy it, if it's going to be productive, you should use as few layers as possible and just give in to the destructive nature. But one of the problems is the moment you introduce students to this non-destructive workflow, then they can't leave it alone. So, but in the composite, you certainly want the non-destructive workflow, and certainly when you go into painting, you miss the Command C or the Command Z. I mean, that's actually built into your fingers. Whoops. So looking in this way at different ways you can understand software. It's something I've been under general ways that are portable. So yeah, it's Photoshop, but it doesn't matter that it's Photoshop. So for example, what made Photoshop so appealing was it didn't become popular until version 3, and it was in version 3 that layers were introduced. Although you could sort of manage layers before then, but overt and clear and manageable and easy to use layers were introduced in version 3. And its popularity just absolutely accelerated. And what it gave us for the first time was that this kind of horrible, this weird surface of the photograph, which is impenetrable. It's like a shiny, slippery thing that your eyes and your hands are glancing off of. Suddenly you could stick your hands inside of a photograph and do anything you like to it. So it's not a surprise that Photoshop became a verb, but as a tool, I think not that many people have managed to not many artists have managed to use it as effectively as it might. So I think you only got to look at photography and say, well, okay, the camera was invented by Nick, how many hundreds of years ago? I think it was nearly 200 years ago. But the first photographer, arguably, was like Bresson. And that was like, how many, 80 years later? And now we're seeing something similar with AI, which everyone is panicking about, rightfully so. But I don't want to go there too much.
Can you tell us a little bit about like when you shifted from oil painting to creating Jack Youngblood and Grieve Perspective? Because that's when you started experimenting.
Okay, so Jack Youngblood was, so I wanted to abandon everything, including myself. I wanted to kill Martin Constable. And so I took on this persona and it worked. Okay, let's have a look at some images. So I made that in London. It was called Your Eyes Would Explode If You Had Seen What I Had Seen. This is, and we'll have, where has he gone? Where's he gone? There we are, okay. The irony is that, okay, so that was me, but I wasn't quite as thin as that in those days. But I tried to make myself super old and sick looking. So that was that. So that was like a persona, I guess. Let's have a look at another one. So this is another one.
And that's entirely digitally painted, right?
No, it's a composite. In fact, it's based on a photograph that was taken in the Science Museum. So my father is friends with people in the Science Museum. And on a whim, I've phoned him up and says, "Hey, Dad, do you know anywhere I could get myself photographed in a spacesuit?" He says, "Yes, as a matter of fact, I do." So he phoned up these people at the site, and they had a replica spacesuit, and then I digitally screwed it around. So I made it look old and knackered, and I put on some various logos and things. So there's the Goldsmiths logo there. It's the Union Jack falling off. You see, falling off, and that was my Jack Youngblood logo. Why does this keep dropping down? And so it was based on photos, but quite a lot of manipulation. So all of this hair was painted. The head was thinned. Hang on a second. Now, then the next piece was a little bit more difficult to see. This was the first appearance of the monkey. Oh, here we go. There he is. And that was before I'd really put 2 and 2 together, realizing where the bloody monkey had come from. Okay, so.
And this is also a composite.
So,
right?
so this was a lot of painting, some very primitive use of 3D, a lot of painting. You always start with something, with a texture, with something. So you're never just there with a brush when you're digitally painting. The philosophy of painting does not transfer to the digital. You don't just use a brush. You're acquiring textures. You're doing renders. You're improving them. You're relighting them. You're doing all sorts. You're doing whatever it takes. So perhaps later I'll show you the file if I can find it. But so those are two pieces of Jack Youngblood. And I had fun with him, I guess, but he did seem lost. And then I thought, well, let's go all the way. Let's just lose Martin. So I joined up. I proposed to some friends in Singapore that we set up a sort of collaborative, I guess, and my position in this collaborative would be to enable whatever they gave me. That's what my hope of it. So I was almost saying, well, here I am. I'll do what you tell me to do. And some good stuff came out of it. I really wanted to put aside my ego altogether. I just wanted to do what they told me, but it didn't quite work out that way.
How so?
So this was one piece. That's Penanggalang Mania, and that's the Penanggalan. And that was a piece. So the people involved, I don't know if I can mention, we did try to keep generally kind of secret who we were, but I don't know if that succeeded. But it was Charles Lim, Adele Tan, and Guo-Liang Tan. Adele was quite a mover. It was very lovely working with her. It was lovely freebasing ideas. We could have a look at one other piece. So this was a fun piece. Yeah, let's go full screen on this. So this was what was his name? It was the first Western trained artist in China, and he documented. He worked with a local surgeon to document some of the exotic diseases that his patients were coming to him with. So it's a fascinating guy. So what we were doing, we were sort of taking these paintings and doing a sort of a before and after of their condition, you like. So a lot of weird growths, skin growths and things like that. The interesting thing is that of all of his paintings, I think, and he has about 60, and they're in, where are they now? I think it's Kuala Lam, and they're in some university collection. Well, they're in, oh, there is an audio as well, that doesn't matter. It's beautiful audio, but never mind. They're in some university collection, and of all of his paintings, there's only, I think, 2 that are the after. So these were, all of his paintings were of the before. So that's one piece I enjoyed, and that's Penanggalang Mania. We worked on together, especially Adele, and that was I enjoyed working together. I'm not sure if the actual work was that good, but this is one piece which we threw up, which I thought was rather, I enjoyed it. It was, I still stand by it. And there are one or two others. So so that was Grieve Perspective. But in retrospect, I see it for what it was. It was a gradual attempt over many years to negate myself. So this, hence the title of the dressel of what I'm talking about. Why do artists and how do artists destroy themselves? And they do. I've seen it happen so many goddamn times. I did a slightly more exotic job of destroying myself, but it took longer. But then slowly, I started teaching painting at ADM, and I enjoyed that. And I also started working with engineers, and I really loved that. I love engineers, probably more than I love artists. All my friends are artists, but engineers, I love the precision of their thinking, and I love the questions they ask. They're always first principle questions. What do you mean by this? What do you mean? So we worked a lot on color and looking at color organization. It was we had quite a team for a while, and we did some very good work, and a couple of books came out of it. And certainly I think my understanding of color became much more advanced, but also my interest in painting. So I was getting interested in painting through my collaboration with engineers, but also getting interested through teaching painting. And I was teaching painting, and I hadn't painted for about 10 years. It was kind of weird. And then I was trying to talk about painting. I was saying, well, no, you're doing it wrong. You're too slow. And I thought, impatiently, I just picked up the brush and said, no, like this. I started painting away, and I thought, damn, I like this. And then again, certain things happened. So Michelle from ADM, who runs the gallery there, Michelle Ho, and what's her name? June Yap, thank you, yes. So I was getting encouragement. Michelle showed one of my paintings in a group show in the ADM gallery, and June Yap showed one of my paintings in a group show she organized. And I don't know if the work that I did for that, I wanted to do painting, and I don't know if the work I did for that was effective. It was just me starting back into painting. But I'm very grateful to them for certainly for encouraging me. I wouldn't say that I was rusty, but I had to. I was effectively a new artist, a reborn artist. So I had to move quite fast in order to reconstruct myself.
For some context, what were you painting, and how is it different from when you were painting back in the UK?
So for June's show, I did a painting using just black paint on white of a hand holding a flame, holding a lighter or a match, and for me this was appealing simply because I was only using black paint. I kept the problem as simple as I could, and I had wanted to do a large painting, and I thought this painting was large, and then when I looked at it, I thought this isn't large at all. Large is much larger than that. So when Michelle offered me offered to show a painting in one of her shows, I phoned up my carpenter and said, what's the largest canvas you can make? Largest stretch you can. We worked backwards from the largest canvas. And and I fell in love with painting large paintings. Absolutely fell in love, which is it's a hell of a curse. It's like falling in love with sculpting in stainless steel or something. You know, the problems associated with moving these things and doing them and painting them are hellish. And that painting wasn't a success in retrospect. It wasn't a success, but I enjoyed it, and it to me it introduced me to the joy of painting big. And I'll talk about that when we go to the studio.
I want to hear about your video work, really. Like,
okay, so I'll look at a couple. Okay, okay. So a little bit of thing about this. This was a model I found in some science museum, 3D model which I downloaded and rebuilt, and the audio is taken from a Russian aircraft just prior to it crashing. And the translations available were very dodgy. There was like 3 or 4 translations, all entirely different. Well, substantially different. So these pilots, they all died. They did not. They flew into a storm. Things went very bad. So I made my own translation using various methods. I piped in the available translations into Google Translate, translated them into Russian, and then back into English again. And sometimes I'd take the original Russian and translated that into English, back into Russian, sometimes into a completely different language, then back into English. And I assembled all of this mishmash of translations. And to me, what the whole thing sounded like was like a passage into another place, like almost like they were going to, yes, a place of death, but it was also an apotheosis. Okay, so that's the story behind that. Okay, and so it's the okay. So let's shut up and I'll just. So the language, trust me, was actually far more colorful than that. All of the translations agree to that. So, one thing I should have said, that the model which I found in this museum website was of the NASA landing module, the NASA, the first lunar, what's it? Not the thing that landed on the moon, but the lunar orbiter. So that's one thing. Now, so this, in some ways, this is similar. So this is taken from one of my favorite movies, A Matter of Life and Death. And this was about a 30-second clip from that movie, which I looped and rebuilt. And it's about a man who dies, but as he's falling to the earth, heaven loses him. So he has to defend himself in heaven against the angels who want him back. I don't know if I've explained it very well. Check it out, it's a brilliant movie. And this is a hella long loop. So I showed this in June's show next to the painting.
Can you tell us a little bit about the experience of making a moving image work, if I would call it that, or if you have something you call it differently? and painting?
Well, but yeah. Well, they're both compelling. One thing for me, an important difference is the smell. One smells, one doesn't. And the other thing is that you're always being able to. You can do anything in the digital, and the worst thing you can do to an artist is say, "Well, here's a tool that can do anything." You know, whereas you give somebody paints and a brush, it says, "Well, you can paint. That's it, and you can only go one way. You can't go backwards." So it's the digital. That makes the digital sound like a good thing. In fact, it's a horrible experience in many ways. But in terms of I mean, obviously many of the pictorialities are the same. And one thing I don't have in common with many digital artists, I obsess over details, and I love details. And this is something I've discovered about myself. It's a stupid observation, but details to me are valuable. Yeah, details are valuable. I'll tell you what we can do now. I'll do one more. I've got to go downstairs to the studio quite soon because my two people there. Does that answer your question, Wai?
In a way, yeah. I mean, I am kind of curious to see how, like, you talk about the animation part of things, like introducing movement into your still images.
Yeah. Well, there are two very different technologies in the two movies I just showed you. So one is basically a composite, an animated composite, and the other is a 3D render. But clearly they address similar things. Yeah. And then there's this last one, which again is of a similar vein. So this was based on the story of Scott and the Antarctic. And I'll tell you what, I'll cut this off soon. Scott and the Antarctic, says Scott going into the Antarctic with his team. They had very bad luck. They also weren't very well prepared. They all died. He left behind a diary. It was a beautiful diary. And every now and then he'd grace off into these strange elegiac moments when all he'd do is list things. So he found himself, this Englishman in the middle of the freaking Antarctic, and this place of incredible quiet and the crispness of the snow, and just these lists of observations. And then the very last word in his diary was, okay, it looks like we're all going to die. For God's sake, look after our people. So that's that. So let's just look at that. Again, this is quite a long piece, so you could get the picture. So the one thing that I've found, again, perhaps on the notion of details, is that the environment they're going through is actually the Martian terrain, which I've recreated from a height map. And the light, the scene is being lit by something called an HDRI, which is effectively, it's a faithful recreation of the light on the planet Mars. So And for me, it was delightful that I could put that in. So, so for all of these, well, these three pieces, and there are other pieces I could show you, but these three pieces, they have a sort of a common theme, a desperate male enterprise. I think it could be summed up. And I think also, going back to that time in London, that it's my belief that there is something in the male psyche that is prone to self-destruction, that to some degree they sometimes see themselves as disposable. Not that any of the people that I've shown you wanted to die, but nonetheless, there's something there, there's a component there. Yeah. So I guess that what I was hinting at. There are other pieces. Let me go there. Where are we?
But I would say that what is really beautiful and haunting about it is that you don't see their demise, and the format of a video that just drones on as we see them fall or just explore with that idea that they will eventually pass. You know, I think that state of that suspension effect that the works that you do give actually allows for that kind of in between that is really I wonder why you explore that one moment, you know.
Well, okay, to a degree that was a little bit of a cheat, in that I love videos, I love movies, and the artist, one artist con, I guess, is one that there are lots of artists out there that love movies, but one solution is to do a loop. And what they've done is something that can sit in the gallery, something that can be walked past. So something that can be is there or not there. It's not something you sit in front of and watch. Now, I would love to have the gall to actually make a movie, and I have done some slightly longer pieces. Yeah, but that's what that came out of. So it's always the moment before, but it's also the interstitiality. So a region between two things. So one of my favorite art movements was what are they called? The Necronautical Society, mostly because of their name. Oh, let's turn the camera down. People who artists, the group of artists that wanted to go off and explore death. And for me, we say someone is dead, or we say death like it's a place. And it's an odd phenomenon. So if someone is alive, they're alive. And they're dead, their head and their face and their body is all approximately the same, but something's gone. And well, what's gone? Well, they've gone to a place, but you can't come back from that place. So I mean, I love Jean Cocteau's Orphée, this notion that you can go into and pass through a mirror into the underworld, into the place that you can't go. So we talk about death as if it's a place. And our lives are full of these places that we can't go to. So I can't go to any of you. I can't be you. I can't be myself when I was younger. I can't be myself when I was a child. But these are all places that are in our heads. And yet we're kind of frustrated. We fetishize time travel. We fetishize life after death. Look at all the zombie movies that are coming out. And I think all of this is rooted in this kind of frustration that there's these certain things that certain places, certain things we can't do, places we can't go. So this is a set of renders, relatively recent. So this just came from I saw I glanced at a movie frame and I thought I saw this image, and I went back and it was something completely different. I thought, well, that seemed interesting. I think I'll make it anyway. And quite a lot of work comes from that. So it's another piece. Let's have a look at. I can't filter for prints here. Okay, this is relatively recent. So this is another spaceship wreck, and there's a skeleton man there, wrecked. There he is. And for some weird-ass reason, a naked woman comes up and plants the British flag on him and walks away. Okay. Yeah, let's do one more. Let's say this one. Oh, well, this is a funny thing. Okay, so this piece. Okay, let's just do yep and up and up and up and up and up. So this will be a light box when I make it. Now this was a place, an actual gallery. You can see it's a painting on the wall there. The painting is the faithful recreation of that painting. I photographed that painting and put it into that 3D render. The frame is an exact as I can duplicate of that actual frame. The tiles on the floor are a recreation of the tiles on the floor in that museum. The door and everything, even the construction of the walls, everything was as faithful as I could make it. So everything you're seeing there, I pretty much made from scratch. Now, if you compare that to, let's say, this is almost entirely downloaded from the internet, that Russian piece. Almost entirely, I just downloaded that from the internet. So that kind of thing I enjoy. I like playing with different ways of doing it. So this thing here, okay, okay. This piece here, that is here in Vietnam, electricity cables are signified by these yellow posts that are buried into the ground. And I like that. And I also like a lot of the rubble and the rocks. There's a lot of houses that have been knocked down and kind of left as they are. And there's so what I did, I went out and scanned this material, so 3D scan. So I went around and took hundreds of photographs of these things, and then recreated them inside of the digital. So effectively what I did, it's like a very long-winded way of taking a photograph. So I could have arranged all of this in a studio. I could have got those actual rocks, brought them into the studio, got this actual post, brought it into the photograph and anything. No, I recreate the whole thing in 3D. It took ages. And so this is the process of photogrammetry, getting 3D models from photographs. And that's yet another way of doing it. So for me, it was that piece of the gallery with the decayed painting. For me, that was an attempt to touch a place, a real place, rather than just make up a fiction. I wanted something actual. And similar for this, I wanted something actually there. Vietnamese rubble, Vietnamese electricity warning post. Yeah, so different ways of doing the same thing. No, different ways of doing different things. Now this one, that's I can't sell that one because it's an exact copy of Gerhard Richter, one of Gerhard Richter's paintings, which I recreated digitally. And I loved the painting so much, I thought I'd honor it. But I'd certainly get struck for copyright if I'd even try to sell that. And this is a composite. So this was in my studio. It's a digital robot's head, and that's a ray gun down there. So this is a pair of paintings. Okay. So different approaches to the digital, different approaches. Oh, one more. So I became interested in lighting because I now teach 3D, so I use different times of day to light the same scene. And this is one of my favorite airplanes, which is the Feischless Dorsch. And this again is the planet Mars. Yeah. Anyway, I've rambled.
Yeah.
Oh, one thing I could show you. Okay, I'm going to show you a painting in a bit. Now, this is, the painting came from this, which is a model I made, interior of a spaceship, and this is the render. So here's the render, and so I'm now using 3D to model as exactly as I can the painting I want to paint, and then I'll paint it. Okay, and I'll just one last piece. This is another piece. This little city scene, and this is the painting I want to paint now. That's my next one when I have time. All of these are big-ass paintings. So, okay, let's go downstairs. Cool?
Yeah.
All right. Okay, then. All right. Cheers. Can you see?
Yes.
Okay, so this is the painting that I was talking about. Quite big. Yeah, it's not quite finished. I mean, my workflow is, as I said, you start with the 3D model, transfer, grid up, transfer, take photographs, take it into Photoshop, correct all the mistakes, take the mistakes back to here, and on until my eyes bleed. Okay, let's move to the next one. What we can do, move this up to over here. We'll lean it up against the door. And I'll show you.
Oh, they're as tall as your assistants.
Right. So this one. Okay. You come over here.
I'm on the other side.
Okay. Now, what's the lighting on this slide? Is it okay?
Yeah. Just some glares, but I think it's okay. Yeah.
This is not finished. I'm still unsatisfied with the sky, but this actually came from looking at a movie. It's a movie still, so that's where it comes from. Yeah, it's as dumb as that. But for me, the only problem in landscapes is skies. I hate skies. They are my enemy.
Knowing that this is a reference from a movie, like, do you still do the render, the 3D render, as part of the process?
No, this one started as a digital painting. So The process is simple. It's either a movie, a game, or an 18th century painting. One of those three. So everything comes from somewhere, and then if I manage to last 3 days and still want to paint the painting, then it's probably got validity. So then I'll start it, then I'll commit to it. But then I'll ask myself, well, what's it doing? And that's another question. And then at the end, I'll ask myself, where did it come from in terms of my head, my brain space? And sometimes, I like I said earlier, you don't know until years later. So, yeah. The fun thing about this is that most of this one was actually improvised. Yeah. That's what I enjoy doing. So when you're painting in using only black, it's very similar to drawing, and it's got all the liberty of drawing. Let's see if that's over there. Now this one, you could rotate this one. Yes. So this came from Doom Eternal. To be honest, I think games have got it cracked as far as aesthetic goes. I mean, games are to aesthetics what let's say the romantics were to imagery all those years ago. And I love the saturated colors of Doom Eternal. I love gaming. I love games. I love game imagery, but I'm absolutely not a gamer. I can't play to save my life. Again, this is not quite finished. There's still some reflections to go. Yeah. The challenge was the color. So it's relatively easy painting in black and white, but I had to think about my color quite heavily in advance. So it going from lemon yellow, Indian red, burnt umber, raw umber, raw sienna, white, and black, I think. Why? You'd know the significance of all of that lot together. Yeah. So what?
Wow, look at this one.
I wanted to do a red painting, but you can't just do a red painting. There has to be more than one red. So and that's the secret of doing monochrome. So this is nearly finished. Again, on the trip of verisimilitude, this is a building. This is a known building, and I took must have been about 200 or 300 photographs of that building and the surrounding buildings. And the terrain was actually, well, I did use as reference the terrain from the terrain map on Google Maps. So I tried to get it as reasonably faithful as I could. But then I took like 100 liberties following that. And there are the little monkeys that I was talking about. There's a monkey.
Martin?
Yeah?
Can we go close to the painting?
So you want to maybe up there?
Thank you.
Maybe. Okay, move to the next one.
Wow.
So this was from Mad Max, the game Mad Max. So this was my first large one in Vietnam. And I tried to learn from the mistakes that I made in my last large one. And okay. This one I slightly overplanned. So I went through Mad Max, and I was kind of like a tourist in this place. Again, I was so bad at playing it, I couldn't get past the first level, but I took about 100 photographs, 200 photographs, well, screen grabs inside of Mad Max territory, and assembled them in Photoshop, and then did this painting. I'd like to return to it. I'd like to do something about the sky. I'm beginning to I'm finally thinking productively about skies. Yeah, like I say, for me, they're the unsolved problem of landscape painting. Yeah. Okay. But nowadays I wouldn't plan in quite the same way. But oh, actually, no. Okay. So again, nearly finished. Yeah, nearly finished. What was the thinking behind this one? I'm not quite sure how to talk about these. I mean, they're for me. I've always had. I love the metaphor of the ruin, and it seems that we've got a sort of a common mania for post-apocalyptic imagery nowadays. And also the romance of the deep space. Yeah. But I mean, putting it simply, and whenever you do a landscape painting, you're painting a state of mind. I think it's as dumb as that. A landscape painting, up until the Romantic painters, I think a landscape painting was just a backdrop, but they changed things, and nothing's been the same since. So from then on, landscape became a mental condition. Yeah, it's as simple as that. Yeah. Yeah. I'll move this just to one side. This needs to be stacked. I think it's too large. So this is the whole goddamn troop of monkeys. You want to get close to the monkeys. And you see they're traveling up, and they're traveling up and round. And I was trying to learn about black and how to use black and white. Yeah. In this one, and try and force as much as I could from it. But again, a lot of improvisation. And nowadays, I don't think I've improvised quite so much. Nowadays, it's only a year ago. Now these baby ones, let's move this back. Actually, where's it gone? Okay, so for me, the one very neurotic part of the process is choosing the right size and proportion. Yeah. And I'm now falling in love with this particular size and proportion. But I bought a whole bunch of canvases that are about this much taller, so I've been going around chopping the foot off of them. So for this one, a 3D model, a hell of a lot of work to do that model. You can see the monkey come a little bit closer. Yeah, that's enough. And it's this one again, starting with a 3D model. Yeah, I'm robots, men wearing spacesuits, monkeys. I've even got some zombies here. They're always. I love painting figures. I love drawing figures. But the problem is that whenever you're painting and drawing a figure, there's something too specific about it. It's a person, it's a particular person. So for me, doing let's say a robot or a zombie, it's a way of painting a human without painting a human. That's one thing I find appealing about. And others, see now. Oh yeah, whilst we're on the robot, I've been making robot heads. And I've even got a zombie head.
We saw the renders of them, right? Or we saw them as images or some kind of a render version.
Well, yeah, there were photographs. When they're displayed, they'd be inside of glass cabinets. So one more. But I couldn't afford the glass cabinets at the time. So the render was so I composited it. So it's a fake. So this is actually a motorbike head, motorbike helmet. And this is all the stuff I get from the markets down in Calmet Street, downtown. That's just about it. There are some other things. I mean, okay, there's one thing that was kind of interesting. That one. Okay, these were entirely improvised. So I get myself packed up, have myself a few beers, and just freebase these. So for me, the fun of doing these was the fun of drawing when I was an art student. I'd like to take these up. I'd like to develop them. Yeah.
You were saying that these were entirely spontaneous?
Well, they were improvised.
Improvise.
The way I paint, there's you can only go forward. It's really difficult to correct. You can correct skies, but it's a lot of work. Apart from that, that's it. Yeah. So the painting therefore becomes quite neurotic. So you have to be in the right frame of mind. You have to have the right energy. Yeah. Only forward, not back.
Yeah. I mean, what is
it's slightly historic stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah. But all of this is really been well, how long have I been in Vietnam? It's 5 years. So, and I didn't really get going until about 4 years ago. And I think it's only in the last year that I've cracked painting. So. Okay, so do you want to go back upstairs and finish off upstairs? For me, in retrospect, you know, the way I framed it, it almost seems full circle.
Yeah, I was about to ask, you know, now that you've returned to oil painting, would you say you've returned as a zombie since you died?
Yeah, maybe I am a zombie. But the loss of faith for an artist, the nature of the digital, and also one, you know, okay, I've framed returning to painting as a anecdotal thing, but also the role that Vietnam played in that. And the moment I arrived in Vietnam, I knew I could paint here. I freaking knew it. There's just something, it's agreeable to painters. Yeah. How exactly, I don't know, but it just is. Yeah, it's photogenic, but it's not like I'm going around painting Vietnam. But yeah, what is it? How did Vietnam help? I'm not sure. There is something about the place at night which comforts me. Yeah. And it supplies a degree of what I felt in London years ago. And my understanding of London at the time was something like Dickensian, dark. I loved London at night. I'd go off on long walks just through. Yeah, I thought London was beautiful at night, monochrome. Yeah. So, but questions? I've done too much talking.
Yeah, I actually, I mean, it's an interesting observation of what you're exploring, which you call like the return to paint. But yet at the same time, I do also notice that the medium, or you wouldn't want to call it the medium of the digital, which, you know, sometimes I do get lost in when you say painting, what you mean. Is it the digital one? Is it a actual oil one? Or, you know, and when you talk about the digital, we talk about the composite, the photograph, you know, a 3D render, a cinematic reference. I mean, all these kind of inform each other and the outcome kind of, yet at the same time, as you were even showing in your screen before you went down to the studio, a lot of them are almost recurring, like landscapes, you know, characters that come back. The monkey came back, you know, the tableaus that kind of have many versions of each other, but they kind of tell the same suspended moment. There's this never ending kind of sense of how the process is kind of mixed into the outcome, and the outcome is kind of looks like also the process, and the visual also kind of inform itself. I really feel that this is what it is, like what you are exploring, you know.
Well, I'm friends with the digital finally. I mean, artist who works with the digital finds their own way in. We're talking here in the company of Ulrich Lau, who I'm sure has opinions on the matter. When I taught fine art, at its best, it was an enjoyable activity, and we could be maybe talking about education another day. But you'd always just my methodology, if there was one, was to hang around until the student made an honest move, and the students are always feel the need to pretend to be something else. So if you leave an art magazine in their space, then they'll flick through the art magazine and they'll find something to emulate, or they're picking up on clues that if they share a studio with another student who's doing really interesting work, they'll somehow emulate them. But then you wait for something of their own, and it's often the case that they don't recognize its value. So gonna think of an example. Okay, so let's say I remember seeing a student's work in Goldsmiths, and she was doing extremely boring work, and she looked bored with it. But then on the floor with some really cool photos of boys, men, fellow male students, but she'd picked up on these things about them. So, well, these are really odd photos. And she said, well, yeah, I think boys are interesting. I like how they're different to girls. I like their big feet and their knobbly knees and their long legs. So she was photographing their knees and their legs and all these. There was something so honest about that. And I said, well, I encouraged her. That's all you do. Somebody makes an honest move in an art school. I said, well, go on with it. And that's all she was waiting for was permission to go ahead. Emotional permission, I guess. And she just went for it. And that was her work for the next 3 years. But then applying the same lesson to yourself is so much more difficult. So, yeah. But it comes with time, and it comes with the help of the right people too, I reckon, and with the right kind of encouragement. None of us are islands. Yeah. Any other difficult questions? Come on, why am I throwing me?
I've got one. I'm thinking about the stories you've been telling, which combines like hauntings and legacies in the same timeline.
Yeah.
We talk about time travel, right? Like something like a thing from the past that refuses to leave us alone, and then another thing that's left behind. So this is just a fun question. What or who do you hope to leave behind, and what or who do you hope to haunt?
What do I leave behind? Some decent paintings. And some decent former students, and honestly, one of the reasons behind setting up the workshop, I want to get this house into good shape, and make sure my wife is happy living in it without me. That's it, really. That's the fullness of it. Yeah. That's it. Any other difficult question?
Melvin?
I think a lot of it does hint into the aspect of your students that have their own practices beyond, and maybe what we can do is we can also save some of these questions that may bring ourselves towards the next dialogue. So I think we can kind of maybe take note of some of these and bring it to the next conversation, because there is an entanglement here from what I'm hearing with regards to what you're seeing, what you're doing, and beyond.
Yeah. But you do learn from your students if you're doing it right. Yeah. Okay. So thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you for
I've
sharing.
enjoyed it.
Yes, thanks, Martin.
Yeah, it was fun. It was fun.
The new works are really, really exciting to see.
Yes.
And yeah, whenever they are done, we should have another tour.
Finishing. I had no idea finishing a painting. I showed you so many unfinished paintings.
Yeah. We did see some pretty much complete, or you would put it yourself, like almost complete, but you were very tempted to change the sky. So
does it ever end?
Apparently not. Okay, all right then. See you guys. Bye. Thank you much, everyone.
Martin.
Thank you, Ulrich, and thank you, Melvin.
Thanks, Martin.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
See you.